Urgent. The Baltics are on the line of fire. Putin waited for the right moment and went all in. A decisive move to spite Trump. The US gives an immediate response. A super powerful alliance that will crush Moscow in no time. China has reversed its course. Ukraine is now a priority. A blow below the belt. A coup in the Kremlin. Problems have overwhelmed Putin. The chair beneath him is shaking and the rebellion is kicking in the door. Shock. Estonia sides with the dictatorship. A traitor in the heart of Europe. It happened. Nuclear weapons are on standby. A launch is being prepared. Its outcome could turn out unexpectedly for everyone. All this in our episode Hellpoint. Right now, there is bloodshed in the Baltics. Putin did it. NATO has found itself in a difficult position. And the West is nervously watching the developments. It all begins with a mysterious train. Breaking news. At this very moment, the Suwałki corridor is explosive. The flashpoint of Europe. The Kremlin's fantasies have reached the limit of madness. Moscow is preparing a scenario that could change the map of the region. Evacuation has already begun and anxiety is rising. And the question is critical. Will the West manage to act preemptively? Next, all the explosive details of this operation. Don't miss it.
Representatives of NATO countries, especially those in Europe, and particularly in smaller countries, really need to take the time to realize what exactly it is that they're playing with.
After Ukraine, the Baltics.
When Russian people are simply thrown out across the border, you understand these are very serious matters that directly affect the security of our country.
Vladimir Putin is a threat not only to the security of Ukraine, but also to other independent states. The Latvian Ministry of Foreign Affairs has officially denied permission for a plane carrying Putin to fly through its airspace. The decision is not just a diplomatic gesture, it is a direct reminder to the Kremlin that in the civilized world, Putin is the subject of a Hague court warrant. And immediately after that, a new provocation from the Kremlin. Russian military aircraft violated the airspace of Lithuania. NATO fighter jets were scrambled to intercept.
This is a blatant violation of international law and territorial integrity of Lithuania. This once again confirms the importance of strengthening the readiness of European air defense forces.
Before this, Russian fighter jets were over Estonia. 2 more aircraft of the Russian Federation appeared over the Baltic oil platform in the Baltic Sea. Russia stepped up provocations against NATO countries in September. The Kremlin systematically employs hybrid forms of aggression.
In 3 months, Russia produces as much ammunition as all NATO countries combined in a year. We expect the Russian military-industrial complex to produce 1,500 tanks, 3,000 armored vehicles, and 200 missiles this year. Iskander. And in just 5 years, Russia may be ready to go to war against NATO.
For Putin, the capture of Ukraine is not the goal, but a stage. His plans involve resurrecting the Soviet sphere of influence where the independence of neighboring countries is only a temporary misunderstanding. A misunderstanding. Those
Countries that thought they were the least friendly, that had the most people relocating. 56.82% voted for Putin. In Estonia, 75.22%. In Latvia, approximately 70.6% of people.
In addition to military provocations, the Russians carry out various
cyber attacks are attempts to gain unauthorized access to computer systems or data, often with the intent to cause harm or steal information.
Russia can come up with hundreds of pretexts for invasion. The Kremlin has already found familiar narratives for the Baltic countries to justify its invasion.
Therefore, of course, everything happening now in Latvia is a tragedy. In fact, the same enemies are present there.
They openly declare the liberation of brotherly peoples, the granting of additional rights and freedoms, as well as support for Russian speakers. And already today, in the narratives of Kremlin propaganda, Narva is portrayed as a city where Estonians are actively oppressing Russians.
The Russian language is not taught as such, not even as an elective. And that's why I'm changing jobs, moving to an Orthodox gymnasium where the Russian language and culture are preserved.
The Kremlin has already outlined plans to increase military production and deploy additional troops along their borders, according to the Institute for the Study of War.
Kremlin officials continue to use the same narratives against the Baltic countries that Russia has used to justify its invasions of former Soviet republics over the past 3 decades.
The Kremlin continues to chase ghosts. The next target could be the Moscow-Kaliningrad passenger train, which passes through Lithuanian territory. The Kremlin is quite capable of using it as a pretext for invasion, supposedly to rescue peaceful Russians.
No, there isn't. It feels like a trilogy. There is hope and trouble.
They could also stage a provocation in the Suwałki corridor on the border between Lithuania and Poland.
This enclave is a real trap for Russia. It is the shortest supply route for the military. It is a land route through Polish territory near the city of Suwałki. In the West, it is believed that in the event of war, Russia will definitely want to break through at this spot, a corridor to supply the Kaliningrad region.
In Putin's worldview, not only the Baltic countries and Ukraine must submit to Russia, but also part of Poland and Finland.
If Russia really wants to seize the Baltic countries, it will have to do so very quickly. The threatening period, which of course precedes a war, will need to be minimized as much as possible in order not to reveal their intentions.
Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia are concerned about the increase in Russia's military spending. That is why they are developing a plan for the mass evacuation of 1 million people in the event of a Russian invasion. At the same time, they firmly believe that NATO's Article 5 will still work.
We've been having this conversation since February 2022, or even since March 2014, when Russia first attacked Ukraine and annexed Crimea. The US is no longer willing to defend Europe, as I say, for free. They want Europeans to do their part of the work. I think that's fair. Of course, it's not easy, because it means having to cut spending. For example, less funding goes to education, healthcare, and social security. But we, as a frontline state, we understand what's at stake. And coming back to Article 5, people often mention the Budapest Memorandum comparing Ukraine and NATO guarantees. But there is a difference, and it's a very significant one. Ukraine is not a member of the alliance, and the fact that Russia's fierce opposition to Ukraine joining NATO and receiving Article 5 guarantees is, for me, proof in itself. Article 5 works.
The scenario of a sudden strike on the alliance's eastern flank is no longer a fantasy. It has become a matter of time and of the West's readiness to respond. Latvia has tightened its immigration rules. Those Russians who failed the exam because they did not submit their documents for EU permanent resident status on time in Latvia are required to leave the country. In addition, starting from November 1st, it will be forbidden to carry out irregular bus passenger transportation from Latvia to Russia and Belarus. At the border with Russia, the restoration of swamps and peatlands will begin to create a natural barrier in case of aggression. For now, NATO remains confident that an open conflict with Russia can be avoided, at least as long as the Kremlin is preoccupied with the war against Ukraine. However, history teaches us what seemed impossible yesterday may become reality today. Urgent support came from where it was least expected. China hit Russia hard and played its cards its own way. Putin has been surrounded from all sides. Trump is leading. It seems that China and Washington have taken a joint course and are planning to pull Kyiv out of Moscow's grasp. A fateful meeting that changed everything. The Kremlin is losing its pulse. The Allies are taking a step that is pushing Russia to the brink. What will be the next move from these two powers, and should Putin already be preparing for capitulation? We'll talk about this in just a moment. Donald Trump met with Xi Jinping in South Korea as part of his Indo-Pacific tour. The main topics of the meeting were trade barriers between the countries and, of course, the Russia-Ukraine war.
They moved on to establishing a longer-term framework for political dialogue, which, in principle, is a very positive aspect of this meeting. As a result of the meeting,
the parties agreed to reduce the tariff from 20% to 10%. This tariff applies to Chinese goods related to fentanyl, a synthetic opioid analgesic. The overall level of US duties will reach 47%.
The fundamental issues underlying the conflict between the US and China are not going anywhere, and these very important questions include the fate of the island of Taiwan and the possibility of imposing tariffs on Chinese goods, as well as the purchase of Russian oil. Trump diplomatically stated that these issues were not raised. But in such cases, as a rule, when no agreement is reached, who says we didn't talk about it?
The agreements regarding Ukraine were less productive, despite the fact that, according to the US president, Ukraine was discussed at length. At first, Trump wanted to persuade Xi to reduce support for Russia so that Putin would agree to end the war. It was not announced whether the parties reached any agreement in this regard.
A strategic dialogue of cooperation has been established between authoritarian Russia and authoritarian Beijing. And to risk that, in exchange for this, he must receive something higher and more significant, something that matches the high level of relations between America and Beijing, given that, at the present time, the relationship more closely resembles the logic of de-escalatory actions in the trade and economic sphere. I wouldn't say that between Washington and Beijing.
Donald Trump rated the meeting a 12 out of 10. By the way, this was the first meeting of the leaders.
Looking at the relationship between the United States and China over the past 6 years, we can see that there have been a variety of important events, changes, and developments that have influenced how these two countries interact with each other. For a number of years, Trump said, consistently expressing his opinions on the subject in interviews and public statements, making his position clear to both his supporters and those who disagreed with him.
About a visit to China in the spring of next year. After that, there will be a return visit by the Chinese leader to the US.
The war has urgently and finally pinned Russia to the floor. Putin's grip on power is slipping through his fingers. This is a sign. The throne is shaking. Rebellions against the dictatorship have erupted in a bright explosion. The dictator's video has been undermined. The final blow is about to happen. Shock, everyone is talking about it. Putin's time is over. The military command is slipping out of control. An irreversible process has been set in motion. What the dictator built is coming apart at the seams. All the details about this are in the report. Next. For almost a quarter of a century, Vladimir Putin has been building a system of personal power in Russia. A totalitarian state where any dissent is punished to instill fear and cement the regime. But today this monolith is starting to crack. The Russian dictator is in a panic, afraid of losing control over Russia. As the Telegraph writes, the bunker dweller is meticulously guarding his regime against any threats. Recently, the FSB accused Mikhail Khodorkovsky and 22 other members of the Russian anti-war committee of preparing a coup d'etat. According to the security service, the organization is allegedly planning a violent seizure of power and the overthrow of the constitutional order.
This tells us that the Kremlin is paranoid. Putin is looking for enemies in order to try to strengthen his regime. John Herbst, Senior Director of the Eurasia Center at the Atlantic Council and former US Ambassador to Ukraine.
After spending 10 years in a Siberian prison, Khodorkovsky was released in 2013 and fled to Europe, where in 2022 he founded the Anti-War Committee. In an interview with The Telegraph, he stated that the FSB's accusations reflect the Kremlin's fear of the future and the issue of the transfer of power.
What do we have in Russia? A prime minister whom no one elected. He was appointed by Putin. Courts appointed by Putin. A parliament whose seats were filled as a result of rigged elections, and in whose legitimacy no one believes. Mikhail Khodorkovsky, Russian entrepreneur and publicist.
They couldn't care less about the liberals who fled after being neutered. They're not afraid at all. They're not afraid of each other. Of the same kind of predators, those who walk around you, smile in your face every day, and swear loyalty. These are the ones who can, and Putin knows this perfectly well. And the Prigozhin media story, even if it was just a show, clearly demonstrated that no one is going to protect him. Neither the National Guard, nor the police, nor the rank and file, nor the generals, no one cares, no one gives a damn. And that's why Putin is afraid.
And indeed, fear becomes the key word. The dictator is cornered and the economic situation only heightens the anxiety. Russia's Minister of Economy, Maxim Reshetnikov, admitted that the country is on the verge of a recession. The banking system is suffocating under the debts of defense enterprises. According to Harvard analyst McCraig Kennedy, $190 billion in loans have been issued by defense industry companies without guarantees, and now this bubble could burst at any moment. Moreover, Ukrainian drones have destroyed more than half of Russia's oil refineries, forcing the Russian Federation into huge lines. There are fuel shortages and long lines at gas stations, and the new sanctions over Akana have only intensified the blow. Donald Trump imposed the harshest restrictions since the beginning of the war. The giants, Rosneft and Lukoil, have come under fire. Now China and India are reducing their purchases of Russian oil. Almost 3 million barrels per day are at risk, and along with them, half of the Kremlin's income. But Putin fears not only internal threats but also external ones. The dictator is amassing an ever larger air defense system around the Kremlin. There are already 5 layers of defense around the capital. S-300 and S-400 systems are being brought in from all regions.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
Incredible. Europe is in shock. Estonia has found itself at the center of a major exposé. Secret routes, shell companies, ships without flags. All of this serves Russia's shadow fleet, which supplies Putin with resources despite the sanctions. A country that for years was called a stronghold of democracy is now under suspicion. This is a crack in the very foundation of Western unity. How did this happen? We'll find out in just a moment.
Estonia was one of the first to loudly declare Putin's regime as terrorist.
This war in Ukraine is not just a war against Ukraine. This is a war against Europe, against the entire Western world.
But Estonian businessmen calmly cooperate with sanctioned companies and oligarchs who generously fund the war against Ukraine. One of them is the daughter of former defense minister Sergei Shoigu.
To say that he will help me. He always helps me. I can ask him something, but he can't answer.
The main source of income is transport and logistics. None of the insider entrepreneurs checked by the publication have Russian citizenship. The company Atlas Chain, which is engaged in freight logistics, earned about 2.5 billion rubles in 2024. I really like it. The founder and co-owner, Estonian citizen Oleg Kraus, found himself a very influential partner in 2020. The daughter of the then Russian Minister of Defense, Ksenia Shoigu, through the company Capital Perform. At the same time, Kraus was a managing partner in another of Ksenia's projects, MedPoint 24, which handled medical examinations for taxi drivers.
We didn't think it would be a big success.
Kraus traveled freely between Russia and Estonia without any checks. The Shoigu surname. It provided a green corridor. However, when her father lost influence and was dismissed, Atlas Chain went bankrupt. In the 2 years following Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Atlas Chain paid 242 million rubles in taxes to the Russian budget. Sanctions are sanctions, but business must go on. An entire network of companies from Latvia, Lithuania and Estonia actively helped the Kremlin get richer. The fast bankering group was involved in the scheme. It provided fuel for the tankers of Russia's Blue Fleet through 2 refueling companies. Of these, at least 159 are the same vessels that suspiciously and frequently visited Russian ports. The companies were registered under shell firms.
The investigation revealed that the company Fast Bankering Tintradi had a contract with the Belarusian firm NNK, which is linked to the oligarch Mykola Vorobyom, who is under sanctions. NNK's petroleum products were imported into the EU using falsified customs codes. Afterwards, the goods transited through the ports of Estonia and Latvia.
At that time, officially, none of the vessels were under sanctions. However, later on, some of them did appear on the sanctions lists of the European Union, the United States, and the United Kingdom.
Bunkering companies must conduct thorough checks, maintain transparent documentation, and comply with all legal standards.
In Finland, 31 shadow Russian tankers passing through the Gulf of Finland were recorded in just 1 week. And this is not an isolated incident. In just 1 year, from April 2023 to April 2024, at least 3,100 such refuelings took place near the coasts of Malta, Greece, Spain, the Netherlands, and other European countries. The Baltic Sea and the Mediterranean have essentially turned into fuel markets for the Kremlin's sanction-busting fleet. A tiny insurance company from New Zealand also helped transport oil from Russia and Iran. It insured almost every 6th tanker in Russia's shadow fleet. This company transported oil and petroleum products worth 35 billion rubles.
These figures are higher than those of many participants in the dark fleet that we monitor, who are major players in their business.
An investigation into the activities of such companies has already begun, and searches have been conducted in their offices. But unfortunately, accomplices of the Kremlin regime in the Baltic countries and beyond continue to earn blood-stained rubles. They profit from cheap oil and gas from the Russian Federation, thereby funding the bloody war in Ukraine, without realizing the consequences, while the war is drawing ever closer to them.
Exclusive. Central Asia is slipping out of the Kremlin's control. And this is a true geopolitical earthquake. Moscow's partners in the east are stepping aside one by one. Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan no longer see Russia as a pillar of support. Washington has clearly sensed this. Trump is acting decisively. Nerves are on edge in Moscow, and Kremlin analysts are sounding the alarm. The region, which for decades was considered their backyard, is rapidly drifting away. In the following report, don't miss all the stunning facts about this.
Donald Trump has invited the leaders of Central Asia to a summit in the United States. The meeting will take place in the C5+1 format in Washington.
And in this way, we see how the US and China are trying to divide the world. And Russia doesn't fit into this equation.
On November 6th, the leaders of Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan will arrive in the American capital.
The US is currently trying to actively strengthen its influence and presence in a region that for many years was considered essentially a Russian sphere of influence.
It should be noted that Central Asia is squeezed between Russia and China and is economically dependent on these two large neighboring states. At present, it is trying to balance its foreign policy, declaring a multi-vector approach.
This concerns a wide range of investments as well as access to various opportunities, the American market, energy and technology projects, and of course cooperation in the important and ever-evolving field of security. These topics are all crucial for our ongoing partnership and collaboration. For the countries of Central Asia, this is not just a protocol visit. In my opinion, it is an opportunity to balance between major centers of power. And none of these states really wants to ultimately end up in complete dependence on either Moscow or Beijing. And now they are clearly showing a willingness to play a more independent role.
Kazakhstan's President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev has already sent Trump a letter expressing his sincere gratitude for the invitation. He called the meeting timely. Tokayev noted that he shares the main goals of the US president's domestic and foreign policy. In particular, the defense of traditional values based on the principles of common sense, as well as the American leaders' commitment to protecting peace and security.
Kazakhstan is also actively seeking out alternatives in its foreign policy. President Tokayev clearly understands that if the Russian Federation manages to achieve any of its objectives in Ukraine, then Kazakhstan could, in the foreseeable future, become one of the most significant potential victims of the Kremlin's ongoing expansionist policy.
It is reported that Ukraine's invitation was preceded by the arrival in Central Asia of the U.S. Special Envoy for South and Central Asia, Serhiy Ohora, and Deputy Secretary of State Christopher Landau.
I don't think this will be a very quick process. We have to understand that, after all, these countries have long been within Russia's sphere of influence, and only recently has China been gradually increasing and expanding its presence in that region. However, the United States, when considering its various capabilities and resources, can over time gradually win these countries over to its side. I think that these countries can position themselves as those nations that are pursuing a multi-vector course of development on the international stage. And let's say no one here will be able to make any claims against them.
This week, members of the U.S. Congress called on Donald Trump to hold a summit this year with the leaders of Central Asian countries in order to advance the United States' strategic goals in the region, including cooperation in security, economic ties, soft power, and effective governance. This will be the second summit in this format. The first one took place in 2023 in New York on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly.
It happened again. Just as the world started to relax a little, the Kremlin pulled its nuclear toy, the Burevestnik missile, out of its dusty arsenal. In Washington, it has already been dubbed a flying Chernobyl. This weapon is so dangerous that it even poses a threat to Russia itself. The dictator is trying to scare the West by pressing the button and waving his trump card, but the effect has been the opposite. The fear has turned against him. There was an explosion of reaction in the White House. Trump immediately made a tough statement. Don't miss the first details coming up next.
The Kremlin once again boasted about its superweapon. Another no analogs weapon for intimidation and propaganda.
There's not enough gasoline. Factories are burning. The country is in a complete financial mess and so on. Yet they keep trying to test some kind of superweapon, another one of their so-called wonder weapons.
This time they brought out the nuclear missile Burevestnik for the world to see, and it was done personally. Putin, he said that supposedly they had completed tests of this nuclear cruise missile. Of course, successfully.
After all, this is a unique missile that no one else in the world has. Moreover, I remember very well, quite vividly, in fact, the moment when we officially announced to the public that we were developing such a powerful and advanced weapon. Back then, at that particular time, even top-level, highly experienced and exceptionally qualified specialists and experts in the field told me directly that the goal was indeed good, noble, and worthy of pursuit. But in the near historical future, it was unachievable. And now, the decisive tests have been completed.
The Burevestnik tests themselves supposedly took place on October 21st, according to Gerasimov's report. The results were meant to instill fear. During the missile's flight, all specified vertical and horizontal maneuvers were performed. Thus, its high capabilities were demonstrated in bypassing missile defense and air defense systems.
How many thousand kilometers? 14,000. And how long was it in the air? Well, about 15 hours. And that's not the limit.
Obviously, this is how the terrorist country is responding to the sanctions imposed by the United States. And it would sound threatening if not for one nuance. It's the Russians themselves who should be afraid. The Burevestnik, by the way, is not a new missile at all. Its development began in Russia back in 2001. However, it was only announced to the world by Putin in 2018. At that time, he claimed that the Burevestnik's range was unlimited and its flight path could be unpredictable. It would have been worth clarifying what the consequences of its launch might be. After all, it's not for nothing. In the United States, the Burevestnik missile earned the nickname Flying Chernobyl due to widespread concerns about its nuclear-powered engine, which reminded many people of the dangers and environmental risks associated with the Chernobyl nuclear disaster.
If it gets shut down, crashes, or suffers a disaster, a large area will be contaminated. Quite a large city. And no sane person wants that. The Americans had already abandoned this anti-environmental project back then.
The Kremlin didn't care about the consequences, so the development continued. But a disaster still happened.
Remember, there was an explosion in Nanaxa, a nuclear one, unclear, nuclear, but a nuclear explosion, after which radiation levels in Severodvinsk spiked. And now they say that this incident happened in
2019. It was then that the test ended in a radioactive disaster. Employees of Rosatom and the Ministry of Defense were killed. However, this is far from the first and not the last time that nuclear missile tests have gone far off plan. Just in September of last year, the same so-called no-analogs Sarmat exploded during a silo launch. Satellite images at the time recorded severe damage to the launch complex, and at the site of the launch silo, there was a huge crater. Returning to the Burevestnik, up until now, there have been reports of 13 missile tests. Of those, only one is considered successful. At that time, the missile flew 35 kilometers, and the longest Burevestnik flight lasted only 2 minutes. That was precisely when it flew those 35 kilometers. At the same time, the Kremlin, of course, never missed a chance to boast about successful tests, without any evidence whatsoever. Putin himself claimed a successful Burevestnik flight, and in October,
the year is 2023. All of this, of course, was accompanied solely by words. There were no real actions taken, only statements and discussions that never led to anything concrete. So even if they did manage to make it work, even if their efforts somehow succeeded, one must ask, what is the point of a single missile like that? What real impact could it have, considering the broader situation and the many challenges that remain?
Trump reacted instantly to the claims about Burevestnik tests and was unimpressed by the nuclear club. On the contrary, he reminded them that there is a nuclear submarine stationed off the Russian coast. And he urged Putin to focus on ending the war he started against Ukraine rather than on missile tests.
I don't consider what Putin is saying to be appropriate. He should put an end to the war. A war that was supposed to last 1 week but is now in its 4th year. That's what he should be doing instead of testing missiles.
But the Kremlin has no plans to stop its nuclear games. On the contrary, they're even threatening that the missile will soon be put into service with the Russian army. Putin has ordered preparations for the missile. It is expected that this could happen in 2 years, that is in 2027. But is there actually anything to deploy? That's all from me for now. This was me, Darina Hutsakalo. Even more hellish news in our next episode. In the meantime, don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. See you!